Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and hello to everyone around the world. And thank you for joining us today. What an important topic we have. We must get to it as soon as possible, but I have a few announcements that I make for the group quite often. I'd like to take a moment to thank our UCLA co-sponsors. Berkel Center for International Relations, Department of Political Science, and Luskin Department of Public Policy at UCLA. We always have to, whoever is opening here, before we begin, has to note the following important information. I try to make it as quickly as possible, but and I have a very important announcement at the end. But before, let me begin. One, while you can see us, we cannot see or hear you. Second, we are recording the presentation today, and the video will be available on the CMED website, YouTube, and our Facebook page as soon as possible. So if you want to see it again or have someone who missed this, there it is. We are recording the presentation today, and the video will be available on the website, as I say. If you are joining us using Zoom, please notice the chat window at the bottom of the screen. We will share announcements during the talk with you here. However, you will not be able to add comments in the chat box. Rather, if you have questions for our speakers, please type them in the Q&A window, also on the bottom of your screen. And of course, you can ask someone or the group particular questions. Be sure to include your name and your country and or affiliation. And note that your name, country, and or affiliation will be announced aloud along with your question. Only the CMED team will be able to see your questions. In some cases, we will answer questions in writing in the Q&A window for others to see. Please keep questions concise so we can answer as many questions as possible. If you are joining us on the YouTube platform, please note you will not be able to ask a question because comments will be disabled. That's only on the YouTube platform. Now, here's my important announcement. We've had a big problem because we start out and nobody really has a question, and what do we do, and should we end early? And as soon as we announce that we're going to end in 20 minutes, everybody asks questions. So if you want to get your question answered, please do it early. I know that sometimes people say something and then you want to come in, but the later the questions are, the more likely that they won't get answered, because we do try to answer as closely as possible on time. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is my delight to interview two good friends of mine who are the moderators today. Kahina, who I call Kahina all the time, and this time I have to announce her real name, Kahina Buagasha, and Summer Semesmi. Kahina is an attorney and senior legal counsel and holds a master's in international business and humanitarian law. She began her professional career in the year 2000 as a chief litigator. She joined the American Bar Association for 5 years as a legal advisor and program manager, and worked closely with attorneys, judges, and law court personnel on reforms to the ethics code in the legal system in both Algeria and Morocco. As the coordinator for MENA, she brought together young professionals from the MENA region. Kahina organized training opportunities and conferences related to themes such as education, women, business, and politics. As a corporate lawyer and transition manager for the North Africa and Maghreb region, she worked establishing and running legal developments. what a career. And Summer is currently, Summer Smesme is currently a master's candidate at the University of California, London. She'll be finishing soon. She was previously the research and program manager for UCLA Center for Middle East Development, where she worked with our international partners to coordinate the content of CMED conferences. She also worked very closely with me, by the way. She has held many other positions in the United States. She graduated from UCLA with a bachelor's in international development studies in 2016, came to work for us, ended up in London. It's a great delight to introduce both of you, Kahina and Summer, for a terrific program.
Thank you, Steve. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, esteemed guests and panelists, and attendees, which I believe today are here participants from over 20 countries, and we're very excited to have you today, and I'm thanking you for joining us. It's an honor for me to be here with you all and co-chair this webinar by Samar Smesme that been introduced by Steve. And what we aim to go through our session today is to provide a platform for women from the region affected by conflict, where they will be able to share their stories and their experience and insight, where through an engaging dialogue, we will explore the diverse role women played and still playing within this conflict, from frontline activism to peacemaking efforts behind the scene. And hopefully we'll manage to shed a light on a topic that often overshadowed by turmoil of conflict and the impact of war and patriarchy on women in the MENA region. Because for too long, the stories of women have been affected by conflict that have been relegated to sidelines. Their voice have been muted amid the cacophony of geopolitical discourse, yet their resilience, their courage, and their unwavering determination to rebuild their communities and strive for peace remain the hope during the darkness of conflicts. Historically, traditional gender roles have been intensified during times of conflict, where women were often confined to margin and relegated to supporting role, while men take care of center combat and, more importantly, the decision-making process. But the reality is far more nuanced, because women in the MENA region, and you will see it through tonight's example, that have been for a long time at the forefront on combat and grassroots movement, advocating for change, challenging the patriarchal norms, and carving out spaces for themselves in the field of traditionally dominated space by men. So today we have a great privilege of hearing from panel of experts hailing from Israel, Palestine, Sudan, and Syria, women and men who have dedicated their lives to amplifying the voice of women impacted by conflict, and who will share with us their insight, their experience, and their vision for a more just and equitable future. We hope that we will be able to dive in the role of this woman, what they play, basically behind the scene in activism, to basically help peacemaking and explore all the opportunity to the peace and challenge and the face they confront adversity heads on. Hopefully we will manage to celebrate what is more important for us is their resilience, and their agency and firm commitment to building bridge, fostering dialogue, and forging pathway towards sustainable peace, because that's what we need most in the region. And women can play a huge and important role in that process. We have very honored to be joined by Naama Barak Wolfman, Mona Damaidi, Amar Kaf, and Wiam Shawgi Hassan. But before that, I would like to give the floor to my great co-chair, Samar. Samar, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Kahina. Thank you, everyone from around the world, for joining us today. As Kahina mentioned, we have a really illustrious and well-rounded group of speakers today who will help us understand the diverse wartime experiences of women in the Middle East, North Africa, and the Horn of Africa. I'll share an introductory question that will have you all, especially our speakers, keep in mind throughout the discussion, sort of an overarching guiding question, food for thought. And our panelists can keep this in mind as they give their introductory remarks and help us understand the following. How have grassroots movements led by women in the Middle East and North Africa and the Horn reshaped narratives of conflict and resilience? So please keep that in mind. And with that said, I will start by introducing our panelists. And as after I introduce the first panelist, please go ahead and give your remarks for 5 to 7 minutes, and then I'll move on to sharing the bio of the next panelist. So we will start with Ms. Naama Barak-Wolfman. Naama joined the Israeli grassroots peace movement, Women Wage Peace, 7 years ago, and has since filled various positions in the organization. From 2022 until 2024, Naama was part of the steering committee and is now currently a member of the Strategic and International Relations team. Ms. Wolfman received her BA in psychology with group facilitation accreditation, specializing in working with the elderly. Ms. Wolfman is a collector and writer of life stories and biographies, and we're very excited to hear her remarks. Now, the floor is yours, Naama.
Thank you, Samal. Thank you, Kahina. Good morning. As mentioned, I'm a member of Women Wage Peace, which is an Israeli politically unaffiliated grassroots peace movement, and we act to promote a negotiated, nonviolent, and mutually accepted solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We do this with the active participation of women in accordance with the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325. And since we were founded in 2014, we have been calling upon our leadership to return to negotiations in order to solve the conflict, and that has become acutely necessary since October 7th and the ensuing war. Women Wage Peace is open to men and women, but women take the lead. That is because we see that women remain missing in the political arena, so we have to actively cultivate women's leadership. We feel that women have a unique contribution in the creation of public accord and in the processes of negotiation. And women's meaningful participation in peace negotiations is essential for creating inclusive and sustainable solutions to the conflict. That is because we bring with us a different voice. And as a movement, we recognize this need for diverse voices. Although it is very difficult because the more partners there are in the process of reaching an agreement, the greater the chances are of achieving a long-lasting peace that unifies rather than divides. So in our movement, we have members, Arab members who are Bedouin, Druze, Muslim, Christian, and we have Jewish members. And all of us are very opinionated women. We are secular and religious. We are left and right-leaning. And as a diverse movement, we strive to maintain a dialogue with all our members and with our Palestinian partners. This dialogue, of course, since October 7th is much more intense and difficult. There are many issues that polarize Israeli society, but I believe that our ability to keep this conversation going, especially at this very difficult time, is crucial. The diversity that we have in our own movement drives us to contain the complexities of the conflict, and we learn to diffuse some of the more heated issues. I would also like to tell you about Women of the Sun, our Palestinian partners' sister movement. They came to be a few years ago in the West Bank. They have a membership of a few thousand in the West Bank and in Gaza, although now communication with the Gaza members is very difficult. Some have been killed, all of them are displaced. It's very difficult for all of us. Women of the Sun center their work on the empowerment of Palestinian women, on social outreach and assistance, with the idea and the intention that empowered women are better able to raise their voices in the call for a better future for their children. And with that thought, we wrote the Mother's Call together in 2022. It took about 9 months of weekly meetings in Bet Jala, which is in the West Bank, to struggle over each and every word. And in it, we call together for a future of well-being, security, peace, and freedom for all our children. As mothers, we know when our child is unwell. Our children, all the children in our region, are in danger now. Their physical, mental, emotional well-being is compromised. So as mothers, we know we must create a safe and nurturing environment for them. In the words of Hillary Clinton, it takes a village, and we need the assistance of the international village. We need the international village to realize that the blame and shame game leads only to more violence and heartbreak. And we ask you to stand for all the children of the region and for peace. And we ask you to refrain from taking sides other than that of peace, because this is not a sum-zero game and the solution cannot be binary. We are all pro-peace, and we must enhance the moderate peace-building movements and people on both sides. So we call on players on the international scene interested in stability in the region to intervene, to take an active part, to supply a safety net and securities for both sides, protecting civilians on both sides from all acts of violence, at the same time pushing diplomacy forward. We believe that the support and facilitation of the international community could help lead us into negotiations and help prove to the public on both sides that it is possible, because right now, at least I can speak for the Israeli public, they cannot imagine the possibility of negotiations, let alone agreements. Levels of fear and distrust are very high, so we need your assistance in spreading voices of peace. Right now, all the world is hearing are warmongers on both sides, but we are calling in a different voice, that of the mothers. So we call for an immediate release of all hostages safely to their home. We call for immediate humanitarian action. We call for an end to all violence and to a commitment by all sides to embark on a diplomatic process with a clear timetable that will lead to an agreement, enabling Israelis and Palestinians to live side by side in dignity and peace and security. It's clear that this conflict cannot be managed. It has to be solved. The urgency is obvious. We have to make sure it is solved in a viable, peaceful, respectful manner. And we need our grassroots dialogue to progress into negotiations between our leaders with the help of the international community. We need the moderate forces of the region to join together to stop extremists from setting the tone and the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Naama. Thank you for getting the discussion started and for mentioning the importance of cultivating women's leadership and partnership between women of Israel and Palestine, and especially the really important effects of emotional well-being and trauma on peace building. Hopefully we can get into that more in the discussion. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Mona Damaidi. Mona is an entrepreneur and women's rights advocate whose research focuses on building personalized learning environments and obtained 3 research awards. Beside her academic work, Dr. Damaidi developed the AI National Strategy in Palestine. In addition, she is the chairwoman of the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers of Palestine and was awarded the senior membership and is an active member of several societies that globally support youth and women in the tech sector. Dr. Damaidi is the founder of Palmec International, which upskills Palestinian youth in the tech sector. And in 2022, Mona obtained the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization Award for being the most influential woman in the MENA region in STEM. She obtained her PhD in machine learning and a Master of Science with distinction in software engineering from the University of Manchester here in the UK. Dr. Dumaidi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Summer, and thank you, Kahina, for having us today. And good morning and good evening, everybody. So I'll start actually with the two sectors which I'm highly involved in, and I'll guide the discussion how these sectors are highly affected and how female participation helped somehow in terms of helping these sectors to survive. So the tech sector and in Palestine is known to be among the fastest growing sectors. In the past 10 years, it grew by 34% and it contributed to the GDP by 4%. 80% of the tech companies in Palestine, they focus on outsourcing their services to the global market. And what I've been saying in the past 7 months is really scary. Like the whole tech sector now is shattered. According to initial assessments we carried out, we found out that 68% of the tech companies in Gaza, they're fully destroyed. 26 are severely damaged and 60% are partially damaged. And after actually talking with the founders of these tech companies, they said that 95% of them, they can't even cope with providing and paying salaries to their employees, and they lost around 40% of their contracts. So in other words, the whole tech sector is now shaking, and the situation is not different in the West Bank and in Jerusalem. So because what's happening, like the whole tech sector actually relies on each other. So 30% of our companies in the West Bank, they actually have employees in Gaza, and 20% have branches in Gaza. And what they said that 60% of their contracts now they're frozen, which led them to asking hundreds of employees to just leave the job market. And when we start adding the gender level, it actually becomes even more and more complex, because like in terms of women participation, we're already super low, and with the whole this very difficult situation, it's becoming even harder. And the entrepreneurship sector is not that much different. So according to testimonies from female founders and the sector itself, they're saying that like they lost some of their employees, some of them even they're out of service, and the rest which are still surviving up to now, they lost almost 60% of their revenues. So how like females, let's say, participation helped in such a very difficult situation? In the past month, we actually started an initiative in Palestine called RISE Initiative. And the idea behind RISE Initiative is actually to help the tech and entrepreneurship sectors with a focus on females. So we're raising now 3.5 million. Yesterday, we were lucky enough to cross the first milestone. So we just crossed the 500,000, and we're opening the application for entrepreneurs, freelancers, tech companies, and our aim actually to help them survive in the upcoming 9 months. I urge everybody today watching us, please go and Google RISE Initiative, and we really need your help. These entrepreneurs and these female founders need also your help. So this is one of the things that we've been working on. Other initiatives we've been working on in the past 7 months is ensuring that this young generation actually could see, let's say, some hope in where we're going to be going in the future. So started from November, we started one of we call it a hackathon. It's an entrepreneurial hackathon for 3 days. We urged the young generation across universities in Palestine to participate and come out with solutions which they believe are super important tech solutions in the current situation. Most of these solutions were actually focusing on the psychological part, which is super important. And in mid-May, we're launching another intervention to focus on we're going to call it care tech, and how we could actually come up with solutions for the healthcare. So what I want to say is that the way we could see a way forward is ensuring that these young generation are part of the solution. And for them to be part of the solution, they have to participate in such an interventions. And with us doing that kind of small interventions, we're seeing how much we're, let's say, reflecting on coming out solutions, finding ways out, and ensuring we could look at the solutions rather than just being stuck in the current issue we're in. I'll stop here and I'll be open for questions later on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mona. Thank you for bringing up the importance of including the young generation. in peace building efforts and in the STEM sector, and we'll get back to that for sure in the Q&A. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Amar Kaf. Dr. Kaf is the co-founder and executive director of the Omran Center for Strategic Studies, a Syria-focused policy research center established in Istanbul in November 2013 that also has a presence in Washington, D.C. Dr. Kaf is also a founding board member of the Syrian Forum. He earned a PhD from UCLA in 2011 with a dissertation entitled Syrian Authoritarianism, Persistence or Change. His work focuses on political alignments, security and military architecture within Syria, and local governance in Syria. Dr. Kaf's latest published work was on decentralization as an entry point to the political process in Syria. Ahmad, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and it's a great honor to be back to UCLA. As a Bruin, very proud to be here sharing some of those thoughts of the last almost 12 years of the Syria crisis. Having been a founder of the Syrian Forum, we do have a humanitarian arm of the organization. I focus more on the research and regularly go into Syria, into northern Syria at least, to visit some of the camps and the projects that we have done. So today, I mean, I'll be brief. I don't know if I have to apologize, but it seems like I'm also very honored to be among very powerful and high achieving women here, as the only guy here, I guess, in the hall. So maybe someone else should have represented the great women-led grassroots organizations and active networks. But I wanted to start with a story of one of the women that really inspired me in my latest visit to Northwest Syria, and almost, I think, in the mid-50s woman, Ala, who is a former prisoner who spent almost a year in solitary confinement. And she says, I'm a proud terrorist. And she says, I got, I got sentenced for feeding the needy in the city of Damascus in 2011. And then tells me the story of her displacement from one city to the other, and saying, you know what, I'm not going to be just a beggar. I want to have my own business. And I don't want to just be busy with making money, but I also want to advocate for those who have survived imprisonment and have survived this tremendous amount. I mean, over 500,000 people died in Syria from, if not close to 1 million. The UN stopped counting number of deaths in Syria. But even now, as we have a de-escalation in some parts of Syria, we still continue to have 300 to 400 lives lost minimum every month. So those are the stories of this regular struggle. The story of Ala goes on and says, you know, she benefited from one of our projects to receive a small business grant to sell poultry to her neighboring camps and tents. And she says, I'm very proud. I established a network of women led households that buy from me. I sell to others, but I really focus to make this affordable to those women in those tents around her. She lives in a tent, and she has a tent with a solar paneled refrigerator that she keeps the poultry in. She's supporting a son who's physically handicapped as a result of the war. She herself is a widow, and she has an orphaned grandchild that she also takes care of. And this immense struggle says, I'm not only to do this, I want to also establish a network of survivors and advocate for them and make sure that this is not repeated elsewhere. And it happens to be the same day I met another also powerful woman, Amira, who established her own shop as a hair salon, and says that was my trade when I was back in Syria, in Damascus, and now in one of the suburbs in Idlib. Many stories that I've recently met in my latest visit really inspired me to say that really the sometimes cosmetic enforcement by some of the donor policies of enforcing a certain ratio for men and women, and some of the political opposition groups, for example, where they establish a vice president has to be a quota system. Sometimes this is needed to break this monopoly of the patriarchal, and traditional structures, but sometimes it's also circumvented by the same people that have put those quotas, whereby it becomes very cosmetic and very superficial, and it is not translated to those women that really are leaders in their local communities, like Ala or Amira, that have done great work in fixing. I was there the next day, almost 24 hours after the earthquake, and have seen those examples where the international support was not really providing the much needed. It was not catered to the needs of those grassroots. It's as if like, we're coming to save you, and women in Syria have not been in a state of oppression. All people of Syria have been in a state of oppression, but of course, women have suffered the most because of the social constructs, and because the local communities really hide those struggles, and so it's kind of a multi-layered struggle for most women. And I'm really proud to have worked with a lot of women-led organizations from the grassroots up. I was in Brussels 8th Conference just this morning, which is the 8th conference supporting the Syrian people, where full of civil society organizations from all over Syria have come together to really share the experiences of civil and grassroots movements. So when I was in the earthquake, I was faced by trauma, of course, but also of men and women, and especially women. And we've lost 2 of our female workers in our staff inside Syria. Some came up to me from the tents and said, "What are we going to do with these UN, support kits that really don't work in this? These kits require, a running tap water, like you have a home, rather than living in a tent with no water at all, not just let alone tap water." And so this really put me at the forefront of really answering these questions, where we look at cosmetics of, we need to have a joint presidential structure for every administrative unit in some parts of Syria. But yet, I was speaking to one of the local councils in one of the areas where they have a joint presidential position, co-president, I think they call it. And the female was complaining and saying, "I've been asked to go and bring tea and coffee to the co-president, So this is where to the outside world, they look at the facade and they say, "Oh, this is very democratic. It looks very nice, and you've complied with our rules and regulations." So those are the superimposed regulations that in some way they're needed, because we need to break these circles. In the area of research, for example, I know we never had just maybe a few years before 2011, we had our first political science department in University of Damascus. So there aren't any men to begin with that have, unless those who studied outside of Syria. But there is also a very small number of females that have went into the social sciences, like sociology and political science. And this is where, a lot of the networks of research centers, Syrian think tanks, we've taken kind of a joint position of really pushing and encouraging and creating the networks whereby women would have higher chances to enter these kind of research areas in my center and other centers. So, whether it's called favoritism or quotas, but I really look at really building the capacity and really mentoring and pushing and encouraging and really doubling the efforts, because we have to double the efforts. Otherwise, they won't make it to the preset patriarchal, research methodologies and so forth. And now we teach, gender balanced research methodologies in Omran to our interns in terms of how do you ask questions, research questions that are really look into the deep nuances, as you mentioned in the opening. I don't know if my time is up, but I think I'll address some of the questions in the Q&A session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amar. Thanks for sharing your experiences from within Syria, and thank you for being our male advocate and helping ensure that initiatives to support women across the region don't have to be insular and worked on only with women, and it can be a cross-gender, cross-regional, cross-everything effort. So thank you for joining us. Lastly, we have our speaker from Sudan, Ms. Waham Shawgi Hassan. Ms. Waham Shawgi Hassan is originally from Khartoum, Sudan. After the war, Waham moved south to the city of Wad Madani, and she is currently residing in East Africa. Waham identifies herself as a feminist and a defender of gender rights. Her work primarily involves research and data collection, focusing on documenting oral stories, struggles, and violations experienced by women in Sudan during the ongoing war, especially during key political events from 2019 through 2023. Through her research, Waham aims to shed light on the untold stories of resilience and resistance among women, offering a deeper understanding of the gender dynamics in Sudan's recent history of conflict. Before we go to your remarks, I'll just remind the panel and the group of our overarching question for this discussion, which you, Waham, can keep in mind as you make your remarks. So this question we're seeking to understand better is to know, how have grassroots movements led by women in MENA and the Horn of Africa reshaped narratives of conflict and resilience? And with that said, the floor is yours, Waham, for 5 to 7 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. And welcome of everyone. And if not a lot of people, because we call Sudan war the people who forget this war, and the world forget this war. It's been a year now, and the people of Sudan, they face a large displacement crisis and generational crisis, and they facing a new phenomena coming month, up to 20 million people. About the grass movement in Sudan, we have something called emergency room. This emergency room who's get the first impact or the first response when the war started before 1 year, and they working and displacement people, providing money, providing food, providing shelter. And the new government, and we call it, it's not the new government, but the government forces by the army. Now they try to put a lot of problem against to those youth. They arrested them, and they ask them to stop the emergency work, and they start facing that. They start developing that, and also there is a feminist emergency room. Those grassroots movement, they try to work with women, that my area, and how they make them more economic empowerment during the war and during the crisis. And this is my last research about this woman and what they did and how they affected women in women rights and women crisis during this war. And I hope I answer your question. But I think I have just 3 demands. I think maybe we can help Sudanese women in that, especially in mechanism of justice. I think we need to ask from the United Nations and African Union must pressure political group to include women's rights activists and feminists in political negotiation, because it's all the time they say we already have a woman, but it's not about biological identify. The international community must pressure both parties to prevent using rape as weapon of war, and international and regional monitoring commissions must include Sudanese women and feminists to document the crimes, and humanitarian aid must ensure treatment under the rape protocol, because the last report about using rape as a weapon of war, we documented for up to 500 cases. And we should put in our mind this is sensitive subject in Sudan with Sudanese community. They didn't like to have an action, and they didn't talk about that. And it's hard to find the rape protocol, and that's what grass movement help us with that. I'm gonna end my talk with a little story. There is a family. and that he was so afraid for his daughter to be raped, and he shaved their hair, and he put henna on their hand, and they hide his daughter inside the bag and put him in the car like a garbage or something to send them safe to another place. I think we should be more focused about what happened in Sudan. I know it's a civil war with another countries have an action in Sudan war, but it's been a big humanitarian crisis against the women, against the children, and we should notice the up to 20 million child out of educational system now, and we're gonna still talk about that. And it's not just talking. I think we need more action about Sudan. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Thank you very much for all these different inputs, and really thrilled. I mean, speaking about empathy, capacity building, well-being, the economic role that women can play within the conflict and how they can build in the countries, in their respective countries. And yes, clearly women sitting at the table and negotiation and be able to work on those on a peace building and decision-making process. So we have a few additional questions here. We'll go one by one. So for all of you, anyone who wants to answer, please come forward. So the first question we have here is, MENA women are not a monolith. So how do their experiences differ across countries, professional industries, age groups, etc.? And what lessons can be learned from women's diverse experiences that can help us foster sustainable peace efforts in the region? If anyone wants to go ahead and answer to this first question.
So I'll jump in. I think I mentioned it before. I think diversity is something that is not only across MENA, it's within any small society. And I know from our own experience inside our movement, inside Women Wage Peace, that we have a diverse membership. And then we go outside to speak with our Palestinian partners who are diverse among themselves. I think this teaches us to maintain the dialogue. It teaches us to listen. It teaches us to understand. I think one of the most important things that happened during the time that we wrote our Mother's Call together was that we actually had to learn how different words hold different meanings in different cultures. So that's a really important point of diversity. It's very difficult. It's time-consuming, but I think it's worth it.
Thank you very much, Naama. And I have just a follow-up question, because you raised earlier a very important element about the well-being and how, as mothers, basically they do everything to make sure that you provide, you want to have your children growing, and be fed in peace environment. So basically it would be like two questions in one, like Women of the Sun Partners organization in Palestine. So how can we encourage and support more collaboration between Israelis and Palestinian women? And at the same time, the effect of the emotional well-being and trauma, of generational trauma, and how anything can be done, or what should be more done, basically helping this effort of peace building in the region.
Well, I'll start with referring to the trauma. I think it's early. It's yet early to be able to treat the trauma. I think the first step in being able to do anything about it is achieving peace, or any sort of agreement that will stop the hostilities. So that's the first step, obviously, to stop the hostilities and the violence that is happening right now. You can't treat the trauma because it's an ongoing thing right now. So that's the first step. And then we really need this understanding that all people are suffering, and that's something that we really talk about with our Palestinian partners, Women of the Sun, is that everyone is suffering, and the suffering is immense, but none of us have a monopoly on the suffering. And when a mother is worried about her child, or God forbid, grieving for her child, it's the same pain wherever you are in the world. So we don't try to say we are suffering more or less, so we deserve more or less. We just say we're all suffering, we have to stop this. I don't know if that answers your question, and I'm not sure I remember the first one. I can't hear you.
Sorry, I'm mute. No, thank you. Absolutely. Yeah. So I think you actually part answered to both of them, because my first question that you answered second was with regard of the Women of Sun and partnership, and maybe just a little bit further, what could be done to make sure that this collaboration and support grow among the Israeli-Palestinian women?
Well, so first of all, once again, we need the war to stop. Because right now we can't meet with them. We talk to them. There is continuous communication. Actually, one of the first phone calls we got on the morning of the 7th of October was from one of our partners from Bejala. Actually, she's from the Haitian camp. And she called to ask us how we are doing, and she wanted to know about specific women in the Gaza envelope that she knows, and that she wanted to know how they were doing. So we have this continuous relationship, but we need to be able to meet physically, which we cannot do right now. And we had before the war, and we have plans that are already in motion for some more training programs that we do in groups that are Palestinian and Israeli, and then we get together for tours and meet after some sessions that are held separately.
Thank you, Naama. Great. I have another question here, which is to all of you, to the four of you. Considering the unique cultural context of Israel, Palestine, Sudan, and Syria, how do women adopt their strategies for empowerment and peace building amidst the challenges of conflict and post-conflict environment? If anyone wants to answer, the floor is yours.
I mean, sure. I'll jump onto this. I think this plugs into the first question, which is the experiences are not monolithic, and there are compounded nuances, and it's really difficult to maneuver and even analyze how the adaptation mechanisms are. Silence very often is not a sign of adaptation. I think, at least in the case of the Syrian people, trauma is still daily lived. There's 50 million people in need, which is like 90% of the population under the poverty line, and many of whom are women-led households, where the women are the breadwinners of their household. So really, I mean, at some level, there are a lot of women that I met really want to have access to markets, want to have access to other women across Syria, even to contact their family members across war lines in Syria, but really have immense and very high needs for the daily sustenance of their kids, many of whom are orphans, and their family members and so forth. So I think that's the main, that really it blurs their ability to access. Yet alone, I mean, from the story I shared of Ala, she continues to say, I have a weekly meeting with all the survivors, and I want to get the voices heard. And I think one of the things that, and maybe I'm jumping, but one of the things is that we do need, their stories to be told, and for them to have access to support networks, for them to hear other women who have probably gone through similar experiences, to adapt and to stand up and to be able to rebuild their lives. Also, organizations like ours and many others, we need constant training and constant not name shaming, which we constantly go through, but more of really nurturing and encouragement and teaching. I mean, I've learned a lot throughout the last 13 years about the Syrian people and the very diverse, from one area to the other, from one village to the other. When I drive through Idlib, which many see and say, oh, Idlib is Al Qaeda, and these are all the extremists and so forth. And I mean, you go there, you see the nuances, you see the people, the cultures, from village to the other. We operate a lot of women innovation centers where we give them small grants and empower them for business skills, but they really need the networking. I think that's the main thing that I've seen constantly wanting to do. One of the young entrepreneurs who won the prize this year in one of our entrepreneur trainings sells artwork, and now is connected to shipping companies that are able to ship it outside. So I think with a little bit of financial independence, they can do way more than men actually in a lot of those conflict zones. There's just resilience is just so inspiring to me personally. So I don't know I hope I added a few good ideas to the conversation. Thank you.
Absolutely, Amar. Thank you very much. I see Wiam wants to add something to his question, but Amar, I'll get back to you on another point that you raised that I found very fascinating. Wiam, please.
Okay, I want to add there is in Sudan something called coffee sitting, and women now using for well-being. They start they communicate with each other, and they start meeting in shelter places or their houses. They drink coffee and they talk about their problem, and they will meet. And also they starting now to make like a handcraft, and they start to selling for the communities, especially if they are internally displaced. And there's another mechanism they use. The woman, she's being displaced outside of Khartoum, and now she's training more than 1,000 women about the healthcare and well-being and how they been in the market, doing a lot of stuff. Maybe some jobs it was entitled to men, but now she learning them and training them and give them a lot of workshop, and now they are in the market. And when they talk and when they speak about their experience, all the time they say we need peace, and we know if that back to us, we can solve that. And also they work in theater, because I think women, they have like another perspective for the conflict. They use theater and singing, and especially for children, to take them out of the war trauma. And I think if we have that good look for the grassroots, you name them the grassroots, I think they have the ability to to manage the impact of this war for the civilian.
Start with some audience questions. I think we've got several coming in.
Let's move to the audience question. If we still have time, I'll come back to our questions. Yeah, please go ahead, Samar.
Great. Our first question is from, forgive me for trying to pronounce, Segalim Woldemariam, who is an Eritrean American. This audience member is a member of two recently formed nonprofit organizations set up by women, which are the Eritrean Rehabilitation Relief Association and African Women and Children. This question is, as women, our voice is not heard, and if united, we can be loud and force the patriarchal society to listen. Can all of these women create a space where we can be the voice for the voiceless women who are suffering due to wars and distraction, whether in the Middle East, Asia, or Africa?
I could jump in. I would say definitely yes. And giving like my involvement with several initiatives which involve women, we're going to be surprised how much we share regardless where we're actually living in. So I would say yes, it's very good to actually share experiences across different countries. Again, we're going to be surprised how much we share experiences, and it's also good to train women to look at solutions as well, rather than just being stuck in the problem. So I would say yes.
Thank you, Mona.
If I could add to that.
Yes, please do.
And that maybe connects to a different question of how the international community can help. I think when we try to help people, we need to be very modest and humble and listen and learn. And I mean, obviously some of us have louder voices or are more conspicuous than others, but we need to use our power very gently and learn enough about the issue before we try to help. I think that's true of any conflict anywhere around the world. There needs to be a lot of education and a lot of humility also.
Thank you, Naama. Ahmad or Wam, would you like to add anything about how to create a space or platform for women in all regions before we move on to the next question?
I mean, if I might add, as much as I agree, yes, I just want to caution again of again what Naama mentioned, being modest and not being judgmental, not being competing. So I mean, competing meaning that I think that the empowerment has to also grow organically from within those local communities. And yes, it's good to be empowered from outside, but a lot of local women, have told us, at least from my experiences, that hey, you don't need to tell me how I want to be empowered. So it's a sensitive line, and I don't want to, this is where patriarchy comes in other forms as well. So sometimes, I mean, this is where I like to caution this very sensitive area of being connected to others, but also given their own organic ways of expression and their way of empowering themselves. So I mean, this is I hope I'm making myself, in terms of competition, I mean it's a paradigm shift that the Arab world is going through, at least in many ways, Syria and others as well, for some time, and maybe the information and technology has really put us at the forefront. But it has to be also community driven. There has to be a buy-in. One of the innovations we tried to do in our, not the think tank, but the humanitarian organization, is instead of we do have women's support centers, we have child safety places, but we also wanted to add a family support unit where we're able to target the men and the boys in the family and really look at it in a holistic way. So yes, we should have centers that only cater to women, but also we should have centers that cater to all members of the community, I would say, so that it's a support network that needs to be built. Otherwise, women will be fighting their way through in their communities and looking at their communities as the enemy, or as hey, the others, and so forth. And we went through these stages, and I think many in different parts of the world went through similar stages, where in the beginning you become this empowerment means separation, means independence. One of the things I'm always told when, I remember when during the earthquake, the next few days in Janderas in Northwest, I was standing at one of our women's support centers, which was devastated because they used it as a place to place bodies, because it was the only place that did not fall apart. And a guy passes through and says, you guys are turning our wives against us, and these types of patriarchal judgments. And we answered him, and one of my colleagues went up and says, listen, we brought in empowerment. We empowered local. We didn't superimpose ideas. This is a Syrian center. It's not a foreign, entity, and so forth. So we have to teach them, we have to include them, we have to outreach those people and change one mind at a time and one life at a time. I mean, this is how it works. If I could have just pushed back and really said what I think, and that's it, but we really need to invite them in. And I mean, this is during the time of trauma, and people still say that, unfortunately.
Thank you, Amar. It's good to remember the only way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. Before we move on to the next question, any other panelists would like to share their thoughts? All right. Our next question from the audience is from Anne Serrer in Canada. Anne is asking, how do you combine Israeli and Gaza women to overcome fear and hatred for successful communication and collaboration? So if Mona and Naama would like to start off.
Well, right now that's very difficult. It's nearly impossible to connect with anyone in Gaza, especially not if you're an Israeli. We did have that connection by phone before the war, and our sister movement, the Women of the Sun, have members in Gaza, so they had a more intense level of communication with them, but that is also not possible right now. So right now it's difficult. We do have communications daily with our friends, our sisters in the West Bank, but not in Gaza. Hopefully the war will end and we'll be able to little by little start rebuilding the connections. But I'm hoping. I don't know what will happen. I'm hoping.
I also agree that's very difficult to discuss at this stage until the war actually ends. And I think after that, the steps would be for us to understand what is the current status and how we could actually move forward even before discussing this, the whole communication part as well.
Thank you. The next question is from Fatima Siddiqui, University of Fez, Morocco. She says the following: I have been active with an organization called Forward Global Women as an academic. This organization gathers women from MENA region, including Israel, and also including American women. Here's my question. I agree that women have a big role in peacemaking and their resilience is phenomenal, but their absence from the peacemaking table is still almost null. How do we change this to address, and this addresses all the speaker. And to this question, I just would like to add there that among the 108 UN member states that adopted the UN Peace and Security Resolution 1325, only 56 have actually adopted one national action plan on women, peace, and security. And MENA is very far behind. So would love to hear your input on that.
Okay. يعني just a little background. In Sudan, our government, they didn't sign for the CEDAW, they didn't proceed with Maputo Protocol, but we already have the National Action Plan for Implementation UN Security Council Resolution 1325 for Peace and Security. But also with that, it's been approved by Ministry of Social Security and the Unit of Combating Violence Against Women and Children. And it was making by participation with a lot of women from all Sudan, across Sudan, but the government, they stopped all the procedures. And that made me asking if the use of it's not useful for all these protocols, and that United Nations has not failed to enforce the signature states to implementation, that why we did that. Maybe we need to think in another way and including people from grassroots to find a solution, not coming from upstairs. Thank you.
Thank you, Liam. I don't know if anyone wants to add something on the 1325, the peace and security, women around the table.
I would like to just say that I think I agree. I think we need to look at it from the grassroots up. One way of doing so is by actually empowering women. And I think that's something that we try to do in our movement directly and indirectly because we talk about it. We educate ourselves and everyone around us that we have a different voice and we need to raise it and we need to have it heard. So little by little, this is happening. Before the war, a year ago, Women Wage Peace would be regularly in the Knesset, in the Israeli government, so that we made our presence there obvious. We always come in white and turquoise, so they know us by sight, and they know that we are those with the peace thing. So that's a little tiny thing that we do that makes our message heard, but it's a process. It's a long process.
And I would also love to add that in Palestine, the situation is exactly the same. So women are not actually part even of the current negotiations. One small initiative we're actually trying also to push is to educate women and the young generation on the importance of being part of the negotiation process, training them on questioning things and ensuring that they understand why it is essential for them to be part of that. So we've been actually trying to do that kind of webinars on the topic. And what we're trying also now to ensure doing is to have that kind of monthly webinars in which we discuss what is the current situation, where do women stand, why it's important to be part of such a negotiation, what kind of techniques and tools they could use. So I do believe, as Naomi said, that it's really important to take things step by step as well.
Thanks, Mona. We have about 20 minutes left and a few more audience questions. So everyone in the audience, if you have any burning questions, now is the time to put them in the Q&A box so that our panelists have time to answer them. Our next question is on United Nations support, again, or lack thereof. This question is from Moha Enaji from Sidi Mohammed bin Abdullah University in Fez, Morocco. The question is, why are the UN and other national and international organizations doing very little to help resolve all of these wars whose victims are mostly women and children? What do women NGOs in the region do to stop the wars and the suffering? It's a big question to all panelists.
Indeed, it's a big question. I mean, I can go on and on blaming the UN for not doing enough, which we should, I think, in all countries. But on the Syria file, at least, there is a women advisory board to the peace process that was established by the former special envoy to Syria, or for the Syria process. That is not enough, but it is something that in the beginning, some people were ridiculing and not accepting, and now it became part of the process. And they issue position papers, and they have discussions, and they really have a wide spectrum of representation from the ground. I think there was a comment that went by just a few minutes ago that I think is very significant, and this is where the solution starts: is empowering these grassroots from the bottom up. And when we talk about decentralization or building the power from the bottom up, I think that's how we can reverse the process that has taken ages to reach where we are today. So what do women or NGOs, and what do other non-women led or NGOs that are diverse and welcome as well? So it's not just, I think everyone has to be involved in making sure that women are not just reserved for vice president seats in some of the NGOs or oppositions, and not just as a cosmetic facade of, hey, there's a seat for you, or in some places where they have a women committee, or these types of downsizing their role, but actual empowerment to key positions of power within the organizations. And this really takes leadership, and it takes a a cultural change, a paradigm shift in the way we approach things. And I can say I'm not there yet in my experience in the organization, but we have taken a lot of steps to really break into those silos and make sure that that the conversation is on the table, and that we empower women, really, not just because hey, I'm asking you to moderate this session just because you know I want to show that I'm diverse or open, but because you are the excellent person to do that type of mediation. And in fact, we're very proud at our centers that our mediation expert is a female lawyer expert who has worked her way up, and I'm glad that we were one of the places that she stayed 10 years, continues to be with us, serving and teaching the younger crowds from those who entered universities in the diaspora and refugees that now have the ability to study, providing a role model. I think role models are very direly needed to really encourage young women and men to really say, hey, no, we need actually not a 50-50, but in fact more than that. You know, that to say that, hey, we just want 30%, I think that's what the UN is requiring from the peace process in Syria, at least in terms of the Constitution Committee and the UN Security Council 2254. They're saying a minimum of 30%, and I think that's, in my opinion, that's not enough. And I think we need to aspire for more, but really look at the empowering from the bottom up. I think that's the key word. Thank you.
Thank you, Amar. It is so important that we elevate women to positions in government, leadership positions in government or NGOs that are not token positions. And if those don't exist, then we must create them to put women in these positions where they're truly, like you said, the best person for the job. And I think we can do that. Would any of the other panelists like to chime in before we move on to the next question? Okay, the next one is a long one. So let me know if you want me to repeat any parts of it. Our next question is from Suzanne Hito in Turkey. Suzanne says, the opportunities, infrastructure, and technological advances enjoyed by the women of Palestine before October 7th were far beyond those of their neighboring sisters in Syria. After visiting camps and women and children protection centers in northwest Syria, supported by the Syrian Forum, how can women and girls living in tent camps gain access to STEM programs? Are there grants available to support educational programs, activities, and maybe even funds for equipment? Also, these centers do offer some robotic activities, often led by young, talented engineers or engineering students, but these have very limited resources. Again, let me know if you'd like me to repeat that. I'll put it in the chat and take it away, anyone. Mona, if you'd like to share with your experience in STEM, or Amar, your experience in Syria, I think both would be relevant. Here's the question typed in the chat for you.
I think I'd like to hear from my colleagues, especially in regards to education and STEM, because I share the same concerns and questions that she's mentioned, Ms. Hito.
Yeah, I could actually, I'll do my best to answer all aspects of the question, even though again it's very long. So I'll start by saying that. So what she wants to know at the beginning is, yeah, I totally agree that the whole tech sector was actually booming, and we've been doing very well. Now it's very difficult to even imagine what is the current situation on ground. But I would love to say that I've known a lot of people who's now working on encouraging having something called mobilized STEM labs. So the way we look at things, like people's going to be living in tents, we need to ensure that they're kind of coping in terms of the educational sector. So we also need to ensure that we're going to them with the STEM educational material and equipment. However, we're aware how difficult it is, especially that no infrastructure is there anymore. So in order, some STEM activities will require kind of internet access and being online. So we've been having a lot of discussions with donors now and supporting organizations to see if there is a way to cope by 80% of having most of these activities online, and the rest could be, the 20% could actually come according to the plan we're having. Another thing we're also working on in ground is we don't only want to focus on the STEM education, even though I do believe it's super important, but we also need to focus on the psychological aspect. So we've been also studying a lot of tech-based solutions, which could actually work offline in order to integrate them in these STEM programs. So before them actually going and joining these STEM programs, we need also to ensure that they're kind of being, because they are traumatized, we need to ensure that they are there, they're actually understanding what is in the environment, and this is something we are working on now. Are there green? Yeah, as I said, there is available grants. Yeah. So I'll stop here, and I do agree it's limited resources is one of the issues we're going to be facing. Also, I don't know if anybody of the panelists would like to jump in, and if I have any ideas, I'll jump back again.
Does anyone have any final thoughts on this question before we move on to our final question from the audience, and then we'll wrap up the discussion? All right, we'll move on to this very intriguing and very tough question that's open to all of you. Our final question is from Claire Walford in the United Kingdom. Claire says, I believe there is plenty of research showing that women are better negotiators than men. How many women are involved in the current Israel-Hamas ceasefire and hostage release negotiations? Would Hamas agree to women representing them? Do any of our panelists have thoughts to share on that?
Unfortunately, as far as I know, I'm not completely sure, there are none right now. There are no women in any of the negotiations with Hamas. Not on the Israeli side, and I assume that Hamas has no women in negotiating positions, but once again, I'm not 100% sure of this.
I mean, I agree with the first statement, by the way. Yes, they are better negotiators. And I think it's a problem in a lot of conflicts. And I can recall during the last 12 years in Syria, whenever we had a besiegement when a city is besieged, I remember the suburbs of Damascus, for example, besieged in Douma for almost 5 years, where even milk was not allowed to be smuggled in. Unfortunately, a lot of those ended up with Russian and Iranian officers negotiating with armed groups, and not even civilians. And so men or women are both excluded, but especially women. And in our studies, for example, in security sector reform, there's a lot of research showing this, that security restructuring that is led by women, or at least the percentage of participation of women in the security sector, the more humane it becomes, and the more really addresses the local security concerns and addresses the threats and the risks in the communities as seen by women who have a different, I mean, at least I remember from my work on security sector, I think there were a lot of even French research in France looking at how the role of women in security agencies have humanized the performance of those agencies, and same thing goes to the military. So I agree. I don't have much to say on the other. I'm not on that, but I think in many conflicts, this is a very chronic problem. Is that women are not represented? They're not part of the negotiation. Unfortunately, they become subjects, and other people as well. But I'm putting especially because they have to end up also adapting to the consequences of those unfit deals. In the case of Syria, it was green buses that shipped 500,000 people from the cities in suburb Damascus and Homs and others all the way to northwest Syria. So today, we had 1.4 living in the province of Idlib. Today, there's 3+ million, almost doubled the population, because 1.5 million people were shipped in green buses, forcefully displaced. So as a result of these generals, army generals, just making negotiations with armed groups.
Thank you, Amar. Thank you, everyone, for this. We're coming to the end of our session. It was absolutely wonderful hour and a half spending with all of you guys here present, and it's clearly I absolutely love every stories you shared, whether talking about the kid in Syria or empowering women to do that in Sudan, or the action that we're doing in Israel and Palestine, just to empower each other, listen to each other, understand each other, be empathic, because this is where it starts. Thinking about the children each one has and trying to have a better future to these children despite the struggle. And I think this is a real way to move forward and be able to be a part of a journey that takes us for peace. And you, Amar, mentioned a very important element. We could go and dwell in it for hours, is the quota. I love that, yes, we need the quota, but the quota, unfortunately, which is a temporary measure to address a situation. Very often those temporary measures in the region have been quite elastic in terms of temporary. This 30%, it's respected, and then we find a way to go behind through it and basically make sure that those quotas are not respected anymore. Women have to be more aggressive, and for that they need to be absolutely out there, be present, be seen, and be part of the negotiation, part of the stamp, part of the attack, part of any kind of economic, cultural, or any different in education, in creating this environment we're living in. Because without that, without this respect of gender equality, we could be just only do not only in one region but also worldwide. So thank you very much for being part of this very hopeful journey. I really appreciate all everything you've said and done from the very beginning. It was uplifting for me, and thank you again. I give back the word to Steve. Steve, you're here. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for CMAD, UCLA, for all the support, and thank you, everyone. Have a lovely rest of the day or evening, depending which part of the world you are.
Yes, thank you indeed, Kahina and Samar, and our panelists for excuse me, for this marvelous presentation and willingness to answer so many questions. And I think that this is such an important discussion. We at CMED have to think of other ways in which we could focus on and develop this these needs and these programs and these discussions. I would also like to thank our team for creating the opportunity for us to talk today. Of course, Manny Jad, Sally Mohajer, Emily Pistole, and Laura Lee. The four of them work so hard on all of these sessions and on so many factors and issues in CMED. As you're beginning to see, CMED is working on two major events that are coming up. We hope you will return to be with us again. First of all, on Thursday, May 16th, Sudan, the lesser known war, but we have been talking about it in several situations. You heard about it today, and you'll hear a lot more on May 16th. And then in June, an update on the conflict in Israel-Palestine, in the conflicts with Hamas, and where it stands. The session will look to the future, including a focus on the development approaches that have been employed. So that's a very important session that we will be letting you know about for June. If you have not already joined our mailing list, please send us a message at CMED, CMED @international.ucla.edu. We recommend that CMED be capitalized. CMED @international.ucla.edu. We hope to see you soon. I'm going to go find my voice. At any rate, we hope to see you soon. And thank you all for a very, very important session.